The morning Hart learned he was to be married, one of his wells had gone dry, 3 steers were missing, and a black ribbon had been nailed to the door of his barn. In Bitter Creek, Montana, folks did not waste ribbons on kindness. A black one meant warning. It meant someone wanted you scared before they came for what was yours. Caleb stood in the yard with dust on his boots and the ribbon pinched between his fingers. The June wind moved across the open land, lifting sand from the wagon tracks and rattling the loose boards on the smokehouse. Behind him, the Willow Spur Ranch stretched under the pale morning sun, wide and stubborn, like the man who owned it. He had built it with bleeding hands, a bad knee, and more pride than money. 12,000 acres, good grass when the weather was kind, strong cattle when fever stayed away, a house with a porch wide enough to watch storms roll in, a barn that still smelled of pine and horse sweat. It was not the richest ranch in Montana, no matter what gossip claimed, but it was his. And lately, someone had been trying to make sure it did not stay that way. "Mr. Hart." The voice came from the porch. Mrs. Lottie Bell, his housekeeper, stood with a letter in one hand and worry in both eyes. She was a thin woman with silver hair pulled tight, and she had lived long enough on the frontier to know that bad news often came dressed in clean paper. Caleb let the ribbon fall into the dirt. "Who brought it?" he asked. "A rider from Helena, didn't stay for coffee, didn't even water his horse proper." She came down the steps slowly. "It bears a seal from Philadelphia." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew that seal before he touched the letter. Whitcomb and Vale. Merchants, bankers, men who wore soft gloves while taking hard things from desperate people. 7 years earlier, when drought had cracked the land open and cattle had fallen like stones across the south pasture, Caleb had borrowed money from Gideon Whitcomb. It had been that or watch the Willow Spur die. The agreement had been simple on paper and foolish in the heart. If Caleb could not repay the full note by the appointed year, he would marry into the Whitcomb family, joining the ranch to their eastern money and giving them a foothold in Montana beef. Back then, Gideon had spoken warmly of his eldest daughter, fine manners, bright smile, raised for a respectable life. Caleb had not loved the idea, but starving cattle can bend a man's pride. He signed. Then the eldest daughter married a railroad man. The second daughter took ill and was sent abroad. Caleb worked through snow, fever, stampede, and loss, scraping together payments until the debt was nearly gone. Nearly was not enough for men like Whitcomb. He opened the letter with a knife. Mrs. Bell watched his face as he read. "Mr. Hart, as your remaining obligation stands unsettled, the terms of our agreement will be honored without further delay. My ward, Miss Eliza Whitcomb, will arrive in Bitter Creek on the afternoon train, June 21st. She is 24, educated, and of suitable birth. I will be frank for the sake of order. Eliza has never been useful in the ways men value. She is quiet, impractical, and unsuited for society. Her presence in your household will satisfy the agreement, and her removal from Philadelphia will bring relief to all concerned. You are expected to receive her properly. Gideon Whitcomb." Caleb read the last line twice. "Her removal will bring relief." Not a daughter sent with blessing, not a bride sent with hope, a burden shipped west in a dress. Mrs. Bell folded her hands at her waist. "What does it say?" Caleb gave a humorless breath. "It says I'm getting married." The old woman blinked once, then looked toward the barn door where the black ribbon lay in the dust. "That seems like poor timing." "Poor timing is when rain comes after the crop is dead," Caleb said. "This is something meaner." He looked out over the land. On the ridge beyond the creek, 2 riders sat watching, too far to name, close enough to be seen. When Caleb turned his head, they moved on. For months, his neighbor Silas Rusk had been trying to buy Willow Spur land, not with fair offers but with pressure. Cut fences, spooked cattle, lost feed orders, a dead calf left near the gate with no mark but fear, Rusk owned half the valley already, and he wanted the water under Caleb's north range. Now this letter. A woman cast off by her own family was coming into a ranch already under threat. Caleb folded the paper and slid it into his vest. "When does the train come?" "Today," Mrs. Bell said softly. "That rider must have taken his time." For the first time that morning, Caleb looked truly shaken. The train came today. He had no room prepared, no ring worth offering, no preacher ready, no words for a woman who had been sent across the country like unwanted furniture. He washed at the pump, shaved in cold water, and put on his dark coat, the one he wore to funerals and bank meetings. Before leaving, he stepped into the barn. His old bay horse, Roman, shifted in the stall, ears flicking as if he sensed trouble. Caleb rested a hand against the horse's neck. "I've faced drought, thieves, and men with smiles sharper than knives," he muttered. "But I don't know what to do with a woman nobody wanted." Roman blew softly through his nose. By noon, Caleb was riding hard toward Bitter Creek, the letter heavy in his pocket. The town sat low between dusty hills, with a rail line slicing through it like a scar. A few wagons stood near the depot. A dog slept in the shade. Somewhere, a piano played badly behind saloon doors. When the train whistle cried across the valley, Caleb felt it in his ribs. Steam rolled over the platform. Passengers stepped down in hats, veils, linen coats, and traveling dust. Caleb searched for a helpless-looking woman surrounded by trunks. Instead, he saw one small brown valise set carefully on the platform. Beside it stood a young woman in a faded blue dress, plain as mourning. No maid, no proud tilt of wealth, no tears. She wore gloves mended at the fingers and held a worn leather book against her chest. Her face was pale from travel, but her eyes were steady. She looked at Caleb as though she already knew every harsh thought he had carried to meet her. "Mr. Hart?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Eliza." He removed his hat. "I'm sorry you were sent this way." For the first time, something changed in her expression. Not pain exactly, something older, something hidden. "I was not sent," she said quietly. "I ran before they could stop me." Then she opened the leather book, showed him a page covered in figures, names, dates, and a rough map of his own ranch. Caleb's hand went still at his side. Because at the bottom of that page, written in careful ink, were two words that turned the warm afternoon cold. "Sila's Rusk." Caleb stared at the name on the page, while the train hissed behind them like some iron beast catching its breath. "Sila's Rusk." The letters were written clean, with no tremble in the hand, but the meaning of them struck Caleb harder than any fist. He lifted his eyes to Eliza, studying her in the bright platform dust. She did not look like a woman eager to cause trouble. She looked tired. Brave, maybe, but tired in the way a person gets when fear has ridden beside them too long. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Eliza closed the book before anyone passing by could look too closely. "Not here." Caleb glanced around the depot. Bitter Creek was small, but ears grew long in small towns. A baggage man stood near the crates. Two miners argued by the water barrel. Across the street, one of Rusk's hands leaned outside the mercantile, pretending to roll a cigarette while watching the platform. Caleb picked up Eliza's valise. It was lighter than expected. "My wagon's this way," he said. She followed without another word. The wagon waited beside the livery stable, its boards warm from the sun. Caleb set her valise behind the seat and helped her up. Her gloved hand touched his for only a moment. The fingers were cold despite the heat. As he climbed beside her, the man across the street pushed away from the mercantile and walked toward them. He had a narrow face, a short beard, and the lazy confidence of a man who thought his employer's power belonged to him. "Afternoon, Hart," he called. Caleb gathered the reins. "Jeb." Jeb Mallory looked at Eliza with a grin that had no kindness in it. This the Eastern bride folks heard about. Eliza kept her gaze forward. Caleb's voice dropped. "Mind your mouth." Jeb laughed softly. "No offense meant. Mr. Rusk sends his regards, says he hopes marriage settles you some, makes a man more reasonable." Caleb did not answer. He clicked his tongue to the team, and the wagon rolled forward. Only when Bitter Creek fell behind them did Eliza speak. "That man works for Silas Rusk." "Yes. He knows I'm here. Seems most of town does." She looked down at her closed book. The wind tugged a loose strand of hair across her cheek, but she did not lift a hand to move it. "Then I have less time than I thought." Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "Time for what?" "To decide whether you are a decent man or a desperate one." That made him look at her. The trail bent toward open country, and the town shrank behind them. Ahead, Montana rolled wide and golden under the afternoon sun. The mountains stood blue in the distance. Grass moved in soft waves, though patches near the creek had already begun to yellow. It was beautiful land, but beauty did not mean safety. Caleb let the horses settle into a steady pull. "You came holding a book with my enemy's name in it. You tell me you ran. Now you ask whether I'm decent. I think I've earned more than riddles." Eliza was silent for a while. Then she opened the book again, not to the page with Rusk's name, but to another filled with numbers. "Gideon Whitcomb is not my father by blood," she said. "He was my guardian after my parents died. My father had a small shipping office in Philadelphia. My mother kept the accounts. After they passed, Mr. Whitcomb took control of what was left." Caleb listened. "He said he was protecting me. He said women did not understand business papers. But my mother taught me numbers before she taught me piano. I knew what he was doing." Her voice stayed calm, but her thumb pressed hard against the book's worn cover. "He sold property that was not his, hid payments, moved debts between ledgers. He made himself rich by calling theft management." Caleb's grip tightened on the reins. "And Rusk?" he asked. Eliza turned one page. "Mr. Rusk owes him money, more than he can pay unless he gains control of water and grazing land. Your North Range sits over the spring line. Whitcomb does not want your marriage to strengthen the Willow Spur. He wants it weakened. If you refuse me, he can claim breach of agreement. If you accept me and I prove troublesome, he expected you to send me away. Either way, he means to use the contract to reach your land." Caleb laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "So you were sent to ruin me." "No," Eliza said. "I was chosen because he believed I could not stop him." That answer settled between them. A hawk circled high above. The wagon wheels creaked. Far off, a cloud dragged its shadow over the hills like a dark hand. Caleb looked at the woman beside him again. The plain dress, the mended gloves, the valise that held almost nothing. A rich man's ward should not have traveled with so little unless she had left in haste. "Why come to me?" he asked. "Because your name was on the papers, because your land was marked in his ledger, because I overheard Rusk say that by autumn Willow Spur would be his," she swallowed, "and because I had nowhere else to take the truth." The horses slowed near a shallow wash. Caleb let them pick their way down. "Truth is a dangerous gift," he said, "especially when it comes from a stranger." "I know. You expect me to believe you." "No," she looked at him then, and her eyes held something more honest than pleading. "I expect you to test every word." That answer struck him quiet. Most liars beg to be believed. Eliza Whitcomb did not. She had brought him a map, a warning, and the kind of fear a person could not fake for long. They rode the last miles in silence. The sun dropped lower, turning the grass copper. When the Willow Spur came into view, Eliza leaned forward slightly. The ranch house stood with its broad porch facing west. The barn rose beyond it. Smoke lifted from the kitchen chimney. A few hands moved near the corrals, pausing when they saw the wagon. Mrs. Bell stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Caleb drew the team to a stop. Before he could help Eliza down, the barn door banged hard in the wind. Then Roman screamed from inside. Caleb jumped from the wagon and ran. The hands were already moving. Eliza climbed down behind him, one hand gripping her book. Inside the barn, Roman thrashed in his stall, eyes wide, hooves striking the boards. Caleb reached him, speaking low, trying to calm him. Then he saw it. Tied to the stall latch was another black ribbon. Under it sat a folded note. Caleb tore it free and opened it with a hand that had gone still from anger. The message was short. Send the girl back by morning, or the next warning will breathe. The note seemed to take all the air out of the barn. Send the girl back by morning, or the next warning will breathe. Caleb read it once, then again, while Roman stamped and tossed his head behind him. The old bay was not easily frightened. He had stood firm through lightning, gunfire, wolves near the herd, and drunken men shouting outside the stable. But now his eyes rolled white and sweat darkened his neck. Mrs. Bell stood near the barn door with one hand pressed to her chest. One of the younger hands, Eli Boone, crossed himself under his breath. Caleb folded the note slowly. His face did not change much, but his eyes did. Whatever small patience he had carried from town burned away. "Who was in here?" he asked. No one answered at first. The ranch hands looked at one another, boots shifting in the straw. There were 6 of them near the door. Men Caleb had paid, fed, and trusted through bad winters. Yet fear had a way of making honest men look guilty. Hank Doyle, the oldest hand on the place, stepped forward. "I checked Roman not half an hour ago. No ribbon then." "Gate was watched?" Caleb asked. "Pete was at the east rail. I was by the tool shed. Nobody came through the yard." Eliza moved closer to the stall. Roman jerked at first, but she stopped just beyond his reach and spoke softly, not words meant for people, only low sound. The horse's ears flicked toward her. Caleb noticed. So did the hands. A useless Eastern woman was not supposed to know how to quiet a frightened animal, not even a little. Eliza lifted her eyes from the latch. "Whoever tied this knew which horse mattered most to you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Most folks know Roman is mine. But not everyone knows he would be kept in this stall instead of the near one." She looked around the barn, taking in the loft, the side door, the high window with a cracked hinge. "Someone has been here before, more than once." The words made the barn feel smaller. Caleb turned to the men. "Search every building. Check the loft, feed room, cellar, smokehouse, and both wells. Nobody rides out alone tonight." The hands moved fast. Eliza remained by the stall, eyes on the ribbon now lying in Caleb's hand. "This is not only meant to scare you." "No," Caleb said. "It is meant to make you angry enough to act foolish." He looked at her, and what would foolish look like? Riding to Rusk's place with a rifle and 6 men behind you. Several hands had paused near the door. Caleb heard the truth in her words and hated that she had seen it so clearly. "That may still happen," he said. "If it does, he will have witnesses ready to say you threatened him first. Men like Rusk build traps with other men's tempers." Caleb stepped closer to her, keeping his voice low. "You have known me less than a day, Miss Whitcomb." "Mrs. Hart, if the agreement is still being honored." The words stopped him. Around them, even the horses seemed to quiet. Her face flushed, but she did not look away. "I did not cross half the country to be packed back like damaged goods. If you mean to send me away, say so plainly. But do not do it because a coward tied ribbons in your barn." Caleb stared at her for a long moment. There was dust on the hem of her dress. A loose pin had slipped from her hair. She looked worn down from travel, fear, and whatever life she had fled in Philadelphia. Yet there she stood, thin shoulders straight, asking not to be protected from danger, but to be allowed to face it honestly. Mrs. Bell wiped at one eye and pretended not to. Caleb tucked the note into his coat. "You'll have a room tonight. We'll speak with the preacher tomorrow." Eliza gave the smallest nod. Not relief, not joy, something quieter. "Thank you," she said. He almost told her not to thank him yet. Marriage made for debt was no kind of gift. A ranch under threat was no safe home. But the words would have sounded cruel, and Caleb had already been cruel enough in his thoughts before knowing her. Outside, dusk settled heavy over Willow Spur. The sky turned red along the west ridge, and the first stars showed above the barn roof. Lanterns were lit one by one. Their yellow glow moved in the wind, trembling against the walls. The search found no stranger. But Hank found something worse. Near the dry well behind the smokehouse, pressed into the soft dirt, was the print of a boot with a split heel. Beside it lay a small brass button stamped with the letter R. Caleb held the button under the lantern light. "Rusk?" Eli asked. Caleb's hand closed around it. "Maybe." Eliza stood beside him, arms wrapped around her book. "Or someone wants you to think so." That earned a hard look from Hank. "You defending Rusk, ma'am?" "No," she said. "I am saying careless proof is often planted." The old hand grunted, but he did not argue. Later, after supper, Caleb found Eliza in the small room Mrs. Bell had prepared for her. The door stood open. Her valise sat on the bed, still unpacked. She had placed the leather book on the washstand and was staring at it like it held a living thing. "I need to see those pages," Caleb said. She touched the book but did not open it. "Some of them are not copies." "What does that mean?" "It means they are originals, taken from Whitcomb's private desk." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You stole them." "I took back proof of what he stole first." "That answer will not matter if a lawman comes asking. It will matter if the right person reads them before Whitcomb reaches Montana." The house creaked softly around them. Somewhere outside, a horse shifted. Wind moved under the eaves. Caleb stepped into the room but kept distance between them. "Who is the right person?" Eliza opened the book and removed a folded letter hidden between two pages. It was sealed, but the seal had cracked during travel. On the front was a name Caleb knew well. Judge Amos Weatherby, Helena Territorial Court. Caleb looked from the letter to her face. "My father trusted him," Eliza said. "Before he died, he told my mother that Judge Weatherby was one of the last honest men he knew. I was going to take this to Helena after I warned you." Caleb let out a slow breath. "Rusk has men watching the road. If Whitcomb knows you took those papers, he may have men coming too." "Yes. You should have gone straight to the judge." "I thought about it." "Then why come here first?" Her hand trembled for the first time. She pressed it flat against the book to hide it, but Caleb saw. "Because there is another page," she whispered. "One I do not understand. It names your ranch, Silas Rusk, Gideon Whitcomb, and a man inside Willow Spur." Caleb went cold. Before he could speak, a shot cracked across the yard. The window shattered inward, and the lantern went out. Darkness fell on the room like a dropped blanket. Eliza gasped and went down beside the bed, one arm over the leather book. Caleb moved before thought could catch him. He crossed the room low, pulled her away from the broken window, and pressed her behind the wall where the moonlight could not reach. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "I do not think so." Glass glittered across the floorboards. The cold night wind pushed through the broken pane, carrying the smell of dust and gun smoke. Outside, men shouted from the yard. A horse kicked hard against a stall wall. Mrs. Bell called Caleb's name from the hall, her voice sharp with fear. "Stay down," Caleb told Eliza. He reached for the lamp on the dresser, then stopped. Light would make a target. Instead, he felt along the floor until his fingers found the leather book. He pushed it toward Eliza. "Keep hold of that." "I am." Another shot cracked from somewhere near the creek line, but this one struck the porch post, not the house. The sound tore through the night and set every dog on the place barking. Caleb drew his revolver and moved into the hall. Mrs. Bell stood near the kitchen doorway with a fire poker in both hands. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and her eyes were wide, but she did not run. "Back room," Caleb said, "away from windows." "What about you?" "I'm going to find out who thinks my house is easy prey." He reached the porch as Hank and Eli came running from the bunkhouse with rifles. Pete Dawson was behind them, pulling suspenders over his shirt, his face pale in the lantern light from the barn. "North Ridge," Hank said, "saw a flash near the cottonwoods." "Do not chase blind," Caleb ordered. "2 men with me. The rest guard the house and barn." Eli looked past him. "The lady." "She's alive. Keep her that way." Caleb moved into the yard with Hank and Eli at his sides. The moon had risen thin and white over the ridge. Shadows lay long across the ground. The broken window behind him looked like a dark wound in the side of the house. They crossed the open yard, keeping low by the water trough, then slipped along the fence toward the creek. Nothing moved but grass. Nothing sounded but insects, horses, and the rush of blood in Caleb's ears. Near the cottonwoods, Hank crouched and touched the ground. 1 horse, maybe 2. Caleb saw the prints, fresh, deep. A rider had waited there watching the house, watching Eliza's window. Eli bent and picked something from the dirt, found cloth. Caleb took it, a torn strip of dark sleeve caught on a branch. It smelled faintly of tobacco and rain oil. Hank spat into the dust. "Rusk's boys wear dark coats." "A lot of men wear dark coats," Caleb said, though anger wanted a simpler answer. Then he saw another mark in the dirt near the tree root. Not a boot print, a small round scar in the soil where a cane or walking stick had pressed down. Caleb frowned. Rusk's riders did not use canes. By the time they returned to the house, the whole ranch was awake. Lanterns glowed from every door. Mrs. Bell had moved Eliza into the kitchen, where the stove still held warmth. Eliza sat at the table, the leather book in front of her, both hands wrapped around a cup she had not touched. Caleb stopped in the doorway. There was a small line of blood across her cheek. Not from the shot, from glass. He took a clean cloth from Mrs. Bell and stepped near. "May I?" Eliza nodded. He dabbed the cut gently. She did not flinch, but her fingers tightened around the cup. "That bullet was meant to scare," Caleb said. "Or to kill the pages," she replied. He looked at the book. Eliza opened it, turning past columns of numbers and copied notes. At last she reached a loose page tucked near the back. It was folded twice and worn thin at the edges. "I found this 3 nights before I left Philadelphia," she said. "It was hidden under Whitcomb's cash ledger." Caleb took it carefully. The page listed payments under false names, land parcels, cattle contracts, and dates. Some meant nothing to him. Others made his stomach harden. Willow Spur's North Spring, creek access, freight delays, feed orders canceled. Then, halfway down, a line in clear black ink. "Inside man to maintain pressure until Hart accepts sale." No name, only initials. "P.D." Caleb's eyes lifted. Outside near the porch, Pete Dawson was speaking with Eli. Pete Dawson had worked at Willow Spur for 2 years. Quiet man, good with horses, always there when needed, too good at hearing things not meant for him. But his voice had gone low. Eliza leaned forward. "Whitcomb often used initials until payments were complete. Full names appear in his final ledgers. I did not have time to take those." "Where are they?" "In Philadelphia, unless he moved them." Caleb folded the page. "Then this can ruin him, but not yet." "Not by itself." A heavy silence settled over the kitchen. Mrs. Bell set a plate of bread on the table, though no one reached for it. Her hands shook just enough to make the plate tap the wood. Caleb looked at Eliza again. In the dim kitchen light, with a cut on her cheek and dust at her hem, she seemed less like the unwanted bride from a cold letter and more like a match struck in a dark room. Small flame, real danger, necessary light. If this moment touches your heart, stay with Caleb and Eliza, because some truths only come out after fear has done its worst. Near dawn, the circuit preacher arrived earlier than expected, brought by Mrs. Bell's nephew from a neighboring claim. He was a tired man with kind eyes and a coat too thin for mountain mornings. He stood in the parlor where the broken window had been covered with a quilt. Caleb and Eliza faced each other while the ranch hands gathered outside the door. Not a grand wedding, not a joyful one, but honest in a way neither expected. When the preacher asked if Caleb would take her as wife, Caleb looked at Eliza's bandaged cheek, then at the book she held against her side. "I will," he said. When he asked Eliza, she did not look at the floor. She looked at Caleb. "I will." Mrs. Bell cried quietly into her apron. Caleb had no ring ready. After a moment, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a thin silver band on a worn chain. Eliza saw the way his face changed and knew it mattered. "My mother S," he said softly. "I was saving it for something I understood." Eliza held out her hand. "Maybe understanding can come later." He slid the ring onto her finger. Outside, a horse neighed hard. Then Pete Dawson stepped into the doorway, hat in hand, face white as ash. "Mr. Hart," he said, voice breaking. "There's riders coming fast from the east. One of them carries a badge." The badge caught the morning light before the rider reached the yard. Caleb stood in the parlor doorway with Eliza beside him, his mother's silver ring still fresh on her hand. The preacher had not even closed his Bible. Outside, every ranch hand turned toward the eastern trail. 3 riders came hard through the dust. The one in front wore a dark coat and a territorial marshal's badge pinned to his vest. Behind him rode 2 men with rifles across their saddles. Their horses were lathered from a long ride, and their faces carried the flat look of men who had already decided what kind of trouble they meant to find. Pete Dawson stood near the steps, hat twisted in his hands. Caleb noticed that first. Not the badge, not the rifles, Pete's hands. The marshal reined in near the porch. He was a broad man with gray sideburns and eyes that moved quickly over everything. The broken window, the gathered hands, Eliza's bandaged cheek, the preacher, Caleb's gun belt. "Caleb Hart," he called. Caleb stepped onto the porch. "That's me. I'm Marshal Owen Briggs. I have a complaint sworn in Helena by a representative of Gideon Whitcomb." Eliza went still. Caleb felt her change beside him, like a bird freezing before a storm. "What complaint?" he asked. The marshal pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "Theft of private business records, harboring a fugitive ward, possible fraud concerning a marriage contract." Mrs. Bell made a sharp sound behind them. Caleb's face hardened. That was quick work for a man in Philadelphia. "Telegram reached Helena yesterday evening," Briggs said. "Said the woman traveling under the name Eliza Whitcomb may be unstable and in possession of stolen documents." The word unstable hit the porch harder than it should have. Eliza did not speak, but Caleb saw her fingers curl against the book at her side. There was history in that word, a wound made by people who knew exactly where to press. Caleb came down one step. "You rode out here on one man's telegram." "I rode out here because Mr. Whitcomb has friends in Helena, and because there was also word of shots fired on this ranch last night." "Shots fired at us," Caleb said. The marshal looked at the quilt covering the broken window. "That's so." "Yes." "Who fired?" Caleb glanced toward the creek line. "We don't know yet." Briggs turned to Eliza. "Ma'am, I need those papers." Eliza lifted her chin. "No." The marshal's brows rose. "No." "They are evidence," she said, not property. They were taken from Mr. Whitcomb's desk. They were taken from a thief's desk. One of the deputies shifted in his saddle. Caleb stepped closer to her, not in front of her, beside her. Briggs noticed that too. "You two married?" the marshal asked. The preacher, still standing in the doorway with his Bible, cleared his throat. "As of this morning, before God and witnesses." Briggs looked annoyed, as if matrimony had made his paper less convenient. "That does not settle the theft." "No," Eliza said, "but it settles the claim that I am a runaway child. I am 24 years old. Mr. Whitcomb was my guardian, not my owner." The yard went quiet. Even Pete looked up at that. The marshal dismounted slowly. His boots hit the dirt. "Mrs. Hart, I am not here to shame you, but I have a duty. If those pages belong to Whitcomb, they must be returned." Eliza's voice softened but did not weaken. "Marshal, if I hand you this book now, it will disappear before noon. You know that as well as I do." Briggs's eyes narrowed. It was a dangerous thing to tell an officer he might be used by richer men. Dangerous, but not always foolish. Caleb spoke before the marshal could answer. "There's a letter in that book for Judge Weatherby. Let us ride to Helena with you. Put the pages in the judge's hands, not Whitcomb's. No one rides anywhere until I know what happened here." "Then start with that," Caleb said, pointing toward the broken window. "Someone shot at my wife less than an hour before sunrise." For the first time, Eliza looked at him. "My wife." The words had come easily, maybe too easily. Caleb did not take them back. Marshal Briggs walked into the house and inspected the parlor, the broken glass, the bullet hole in the wall. He checked the window frame and asked where Eliza had been standing. Then he went outside with Caleb and Hank to the cottonwoods by the creek. Eliza stayed on the porch with Mrs. Bell, the preacher, and 3 watchful hands. Pete Dawson stood by the hitching rail, not close enough to join them, not far enough to seem apart. Eliza watched him. He was sweating, though the morning still held a cool edge. His gaze kept moving to the eastern trail, then to the barn, then to the marshal near the creek. When he caught Eliza looking, he dropped his eyes. Mrs. Bell leaned close. "That man's got guilt sitting on his shoulders." "Maybe fear," Eliza said. "Sometimes they ride the same horse." Eliza handed the leather book to Mrs. Bell. "Hold this for me, please." Mrs. Bell's eyes widened. "Dear Hart, I don't think." "Only for a moment." Eliza stepped off the porch. Pete straightened. "Ma'am." She stopped a few feet from him. "Mr. Dawson, when did you send the telegram?" The color drained from his face. "I didn't. I did not say which telegram." His mouth opened, then closed. Behind them, one of the younger hands turned his head. Pete saw it and looked trapped. Eliza kept her voice low. "You do not strike me as a cruel man. Frightened, yes. Bought perhaps, but not cruel, so I am asking before the marshal does." Pete swallowed hard. His hands shook around his hat brim. "I got a sister in Deer Lodge," he whispered. "Widow, 2 little boys. Rusk's man said her debt would be called if I didn't pass a long word." "What word?" "When you came, where you slept, whether Mr. Hart kept the book." Eliza felt the ground tilt under her, but she held still. "Did you fire into the house?" Pete's eyes filled with horror. "No, ma'am, I swear before heaven I never would. I left the ribbon. I sent word, that's all." "That is not all," she said gently, "but it may be the difference between being lost and being saved." His face twisted. By then Caleb and the marshal were walking back from the creek. Caleb saw Eliza near Pete and quickened his pace. "Tell him," Eliza said. Pete looked at Caleb, then at the marshal. For one long second fear won. Then he lowered his head. "I helped Rusk," he said. The yard seemed to hold its breath. Caleb stopped in front of him. His voice was quiet, which was worse than shouting. "How much?" Enough to shame me." Hank cursed under his breath. Pete wiped his face with one sleeve. "I told them about the north pasture, the feed orders, the dry well, and the lady's room, but I never shot at her. I don't know who did." Marshal Briggs stepped closer. "Who gave you orders?" "Jeb Mallory mostly, but there was another man last night." Pete looked at Eliza. "Not Rusk, not one of his riders, a city man, fine boots, walked with a cane." Caleb's blood went cold. Eliza's hand moved to the ring on her finger. "Whitcomb," she said. Pete nodded once. "He's in Montana." If you believe one frightened man can still choose the truth, remember this moment, because Pete's confession had just opened a door none of them were ready to walk through. Before anyone could speak again, a rider appeared on the western ridge, waving his hat like the devil was behind him. It was Eli Boone's younger brother from town. He came tearing into the yard, horse nearly stumbling, face white with dust. "Mr. Hart," he shouted, "Bitter Creek's burning. Rusk's men are telling everyone your new wife started it." The word struck the yard harder than any bullet. "Bitter Creek's burning. Rusk's men are telling everyone your new wife started it." For one breath, no one moved. The wind dragged dust across the yard, lifting it around boots and wagon wheels. Eliza stood near the hitching rail with Pete Dawson's confession still hanging in the air, and now another accusation had come riding in before the first wound could close. Caleb turned to the boy. "What's burning?" "The mercantile," the boy panted. "Part of the freight office, too. Fire started behind Danner's store. Folks are passing buckets, but the wind's pushing it bad." Marshal Briggs stepped forward. "Who said Mrs. Hart started it?" "Jeb Mallory. He was shouting in the street. Said she brought stolen papers, then set fire to hide proof. Said Mr. Hart was sheltering her." Caleb looked toward the western road. Bitter Creek lay miles away, but he could almost see the smoke in his mind. A fire in a frontier town was no small trouble. One wrong gust could take half the street. He turned to Hank. "Saddle Roman and 4 fresh horses." Marshal Briggs caught his arm. "Hold on. You ride into town angry and you make their story stronger. My town is burning. And your wife is being named for it." Caleb's eyes flashed. "Then we ride in calm." Eliza stepped forward. "I am going with you." "No," Caleb said at once. She looked at him, hurt but steady. "If I hide here, they decide who I am before I speak. They may not let you speak. Then they will see me stand." Mrs. Bell came down from the porch with the leather book held tight against her chest. "She's right, Caleb. A lie grows teeth when decent people leave it alone." Caleb looked at Eliza's cut cheek, the ring on her finger, the tired strength in her face. Every instinct in him wanted to lock her behind thick walls until the danger passed. But the frontier did not pass danger politely. It carried it to your door and waited to see who opened. He nodded once. "You ride beside me." Within minutes, the yard filled with motion. Saddles were thrown over horses. Rifles were checked but kept low. Marshal Briggs mounted with his deputies. Pete Dawson stood alone near the barn, pale and shaking. Caleb looked at him. "You stay here under Hank's watch." Pete lowered his head. "Yes, sir." Eliza paused before mounting. She faced Pete. "If you know anything else, now is the hour to remember it." Pete's mouth trembled. "The city man with the cane, he asked about Danner's store." Caleb stilled. "The mercantile." Pete nodded. "Asked where Mr. Danner keeps letters for ranchers when mail comes late. Said some things burn better before a judge reads them." Eliza's eyes widened. "The post shelf." Mrs. Bell pressed a hand to her mouth. "Judge Weatherby's reply." Eliza gripped the saddle horn. "I wrote to him from the train stop before Bitter Creek. I told him I had proof and asked him to send word to Danner's mercantile if he could meet." Caleb swung into the saddle. "Then this fire was not to frame you first. It was to burn the judge's answer." They rode hard. The road to Bitter Creek cut through dry grass and low hills. Eliza had not ridden much in years, but she kept pace, jaw set, hands tight on the reins. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye. She leaned with the horse when the trail dipped. She did not complain when dust struck her face or when branches scratched her skirt. Behind them came Marshal Briggs, his deputies, Hank and Eli. No one spoke. The only sounds were hooves, leather, and the distant bell clanging from town. When they crested the last ridge, Bitter Creek lay below under a dirty column of smoke. The mercantile burned at the rear, flames licking up the back wall where crates and feed sacks had caught. Men formed a bucket line from the town pump. Women carried wet blankets. Children stood crying near the church steps. The freight office roof smoked, but had not yet gone. And in the middle of the street stood Jeb Mallory, pointing toward the riders as they came in. "There she is," he shouted. "There's the woman who brought this curse on us." Faces turned. Fear makes people hungry for someone to blame. Eliza felt it the moment she rode into town. Eyes fixed on her bandaged cheek, her travel-worn dress, the book Mrs. Bell had wrapped and tied behind Caleb's saddle. Some faces showed doubt. Others had already judged her. Caleb dismounted in front of the mercantile. "Jeb, step aside." Jeb grinned, but sweat ran down his temple. "You protecting her now? That fire started right after word spread she was carrying stolen papers." Marshal Briggs pushed through the crowd. "Who saw her said it." Jeb's grin faltered. "Ain't no one saying they saw her with a match." "Then keep your mouth shut unless truth comes out with it." A few townsfolk murmured. Eliza climbed down from her horse. Her knees ached from the ride, but she stood straight. She looked past Jeb to the burning store and saw Mr. Danner, the owner, coughing near the doorway with soot on his face. "Mr. Danner," she called, "the mail shelf. Is it still inside?" He wiped his eyes. "Back wall, fire's near it." Caleb was already moving. Eliza grabbed his sleeve. "No. There may be a letter. There may be death in there too." He looked at her hand on his arm. The silver ring shone through the dust. Then Mr. Danner coughed hard and said, "Back door's blocked, but cellar hatch runs under the counter." Caleb turned to Hank. "Wet blankets." Marshal Briggs ordered his deputies to hold the crowd back. Eliza worked beside the women at the pump, soaking blankets, passing buckets, doing anything her hands could find. People stared less once they saw her labor. A woman named Ruth Danner looked at Eliza, then placed a bucket in her hands without a word. Caleb and Hank went through the cellar hatch under wet wool. Smoke rolled out black around them. Eliza stood frozen only after they vanished. Every second stretched cruelly. Then a shout came from inside. A crash. The crowd surged. Eliza stepped forward, heart beating so hard she could hardly hear the bell. At last Hank stumbled out, coughing, with Caleb behind him. Caleb's coat sleeve smoked. In his hand was a scorched bundle of letters tied with twine. Eliza ran to him before she remembered the town was watching. He dropped to one knee in the dirt, coughing, and held up the bundle. "Mail shelf." Marshal Briggs cut the twine with his knife. Several letters were ruined. 2 were readable. 1 bore Judge Weatherby's seal. Eliza took it with trembling fingers. Caleb rose slowly. "Open it." She broke the seal. The message was brief, but every word carried weight. Judge Weatherby agreed to meet in Helena. More than that, he had already reviewed older complaints against Gideon Whitcomb and Silas Rusk. He warned Eliza to trust no courier sent in his name. At the bottom was one final line. "The man with the silver-handled cane is not Whitcomb. He is his collector, Amos Creed, and he has killed before without leaving proof." Eliza looked up, cold dread moving through her. Across the street, Jeb Mallory was no longer standing in the crowd. And neither was Marshal Briggs's second deputy. Eliza held Judge Weatherby's letter so tightly, The scorched edge broke between her fingers. The crowd in Bitter Creek had gone from angry to afraid in the space of a minute. A false story was easy to shout over smoke and bells. A name like Amos Creed was different. It moved through the townsfolk in whispers, touching old fears, half-heard rumors, and memories of men who had vanished after crossing powerful people. Caleb saw Jeb Mallory's empty place near the water trough. Then he saw the missing deputy's horse gone from the hitch rail. Marshal Briggs noticed it too, his face darkened. "Where is Turner?" One of the remaining deputies looked around, confused. "He was here a moment ago." Caleb stepped into the street, scanning both ends of town. "Jeb is gone too." Eliza turned toward the alley beside the freight office. Smoke drifted low there, twisting around barrels and wagon wheels. A thin line of fresh hoof marks cut through the ash. "They went north," she said. Caleb followed her gaze. "North Road leads to Rusk's place." "And to the Helena Trail if a man knows the cut through Miller's Wash," Marshal Briggs added. Eliza folded the judge's letter and placed it inside the leather book. "If Creed has the deputy with him, then he has a badge, a witness, and a way to stop us before we reach the judge." Caleb did not like how quickly she understood danger. Nobody should have had to learn that much fear. He turned to Marshal Briggs. "Can you hold this town?" Briggs glanced at the burning mercantile. The flames were lower now, but smoke still rose from the rear wall. "I can hold the town, but I am riding after my deputy." "You may be riding after a bought man," Hank said. The marshal shot him a hard look, but not an unfair one. "Then I'll bring him back bought or broken." Caleb looked at Eliza. "You stay here with Mrs. Bell." "No." He rubbed soot from his jaw and let out a tired breath. "Eliza. Creed came because of those papers. If you ride without me, he will only circle back to wherever I am. He already shot at your room. And missed. He may not miss if he finds me alone." Mrs. Bell, who had arrived in the supply wagon with 2 ranch hands, stepped closer. "She's got sense, Caleb. Bitter Creek just accused her once. Some here still believe it. I'll stand with her if she stays, but I cannot promise every frightened fool in town will." That truth was bitter, but Caleb tasted it clearly. He looked at the faces around them, some ashamed now, some uncertain, a few still suspicious, as if innocence was too much trouble once blame had already found a home. Ruth Danner stepped out from the mercantile with soot on her dress and a wet cloth around her mouth. "Mrs. Hart pulled buckets with the rest of us," she called. "Anyone says she burned my store answers to me." That helped, not enough but some. Eliza turned to Ruth. "Thank you." Ruth gave a small nod. "Find the man who did." Within minutes, a plan formed under pressure. Hank and Eli would ride with Caleb. Marshal Briggs and his remaining deputy would follow. Mrs. Bell would take the judge's copied letter and one list of figures hidden under her bodice back to Willow Spur in case the book was lost. Eliza would carry the leather book itself, wrapped in oilcloth and tied under her coat. Caleb did not like any of it, but he liked helplessness less. They rode north out of Bitter Creek while smoke still climbed behind them. The sun had lifted high and harsh, laying white light over the road. Eliza rode between Caleb and Hank. Her face was pale under the dust, but her seat was steady. After 2 miles, Caleb slowed near a fork hidden by cottonwoods. Hank pointed down. 2 riders cut east, one horse favoring the left front. "Jeb's mare," Caleb said. "She had that limp last winter." Marshal Briggs leaned from his saddle. "And Turner?" "Maybe with him." Eliza looked toward the wash. "Creed will not go to Rusk's main house if he can avoid it. Too many eyes. Does Rusk have lined cabins?" Caleb nodded slowly. "One near Miller's Wash old trapper cabin before Rusk bought the section." "Then he will go there," Eliza said. "Men like Creed do not run into the open. They go where someone has already prepared a place to hide." No one argued. The trail into Miller's Wash narrowed between cut banks of pale clay. The land dipped and twisted, swallowing sound. Scrub brush scratched at their boots. A crow lifted from a dead pine and flew west, crying once. Halfway through the wash, Caleb raised his hand. Everyone stopped. Ahead something moved. Not a man, a horse. It stood riderless near a patch of shade, reins dragging, saddle crooked. Marshal Briggs swore under his breath. That's Turner's horse. They dismounted and moved carefully. The deputy was found behind a low bank, alive but dazed, his hands tied with his own reins. A bruise marked his temple. His badge was gone. Briggs knelt beside him. "Turner, look at me." The deputy groaned. "Creed." "Where?" "Cabin," Turner winced. "Jeb took money, I didn't. Creed jumped me when I questioned him, took my coat, took my badge." Caleb looked down the wash toward the hidden line cabin. "How many?" "Creed, Jeb, maybe one more waiting." Turner caught Eliza's sleeve as she stepped near. His voice shook. "He said the woman would trade the book for Hart's life." The wash went silent. Caleb's eyes met Eliza's. She understood before he spoke. Creed had not fled from them. He had pulled them here. A faint sound cracked through the clay walls. Not a gunshot. A whistle. From the ridge above, Jeb Mallory appeared with a rifle held low and shame written across his face. Beside him stood a tall man in a clean dark coat, one gloved hand resting on a silver-handled cane. Amos Creed smiled down at them. "Mrs. Hart," he called, "your guardian wants his book back." Amos Creed stood above them like he owned the morning. The sun caught the silver head of his cane, bright and cold. He was tall, narrow, and clean in a way that made the dusty wash around him seem ashamed of itself. His boots shone. His collar sat straight. Not one hair had fallen out of place, though every other rider in that clay-cut wore sweat and trailed dirt. Jeb Mallory stood beside him with a rifle, but his courage was leaking away by the second. Caleb kept his hands where Creed could see them. Hank and Eli had their rifles, but lifting them would be foolish. Creed had the ridge. One wrong move and the wash would become a grave. Marshal Briggs stayed low beside Turner, his jaw tight. Eliza sat very still on her horse. Under her coat, the leather book pressed against her ribs like a second heart. Creed smiled at her. "You have caused a great deal of inconvenience for a woman no one expected to matter." Eliza's face did not change. "Men like you often make that mistake." Caleb felt fear move through him, sharp and quiet. Not fear for himself. That was familiar. Fear for her was different. It had no place to go. It burned in the chest and made a man want to do reckless things. Creed tapped his cane once against the ridge stone. "Here is what will happen. Mrs. Hart will ride up alone and hand me Mr. Whitcomb's property. In return, Mr. Hart and his friends may carry the deputy back to town with a brave story about being ambushed by unknown thieves." Marshal Briggs called up, "You struck a territorial deputy. That story won't hold." Creed looked mildly amused. "Marshal, stories hold when the right men repeat them." Jeb shifted his rifle. "Maybe we ought to move this along." Creed's eyes slid to him. "Do not speak unless you are improving the silence." Jeb's mouth shut. Caleb watched the exchange closely. Creed was calm, but Jeb was close to breaking. A frightened man with a rifle was sometimes more dangerous than a wicked one. Eliza noticed too. She slowly dismounted. Caleb turned his head. "No." She looked at him, and in that one look he saw what she could not say aloud. "Trust me." He hated it. He hated that trust sometimes meant letting a person step toward danger while every bone in your body screamed against it. Eliza untied the oilcloth bundle from beneath her coat. "You want the book, Mr. Creed." "That is why I asked." "No, you want the pages that name Whitcomb, Rusk, and you. The rest is worthless to you." Creed's smile thinned. "Bring it up." Eliza took one step toward the narrow trail leading to the ridge, then another. Caleb shifted, but Hank gripped his sleeve hard enough to stop him. "Let her work," Hank muttered. Eliza climbed slowly, one hand on the clay wall for balance. Dust clung to her skirt. The bandage on her cheek had loosened, showing the small red line beneath. She looked fragile against the high ridge, but Caleb knew better now. Eliza Hart was not fragile. She was a door that had been locked too long and finally blown open by truth. When she reached the ridge, Jeb backed away from her as if guilt itself stood in her dress. Creed held out his gloved hand. Eliza did not give him the book. "First, tell Jeb what happens after you get this." Jeb frowned. "What's she talking about?" Creed's eyes hardened. "Hand me the book." "He thinks Rusk will pay him," Eliza said, her voice clear enough to carry down into the wash. "But loose men become loose ends. Mr. Creed did not leave Philadelphia to share money with a hired rider who can place him at a burned mercantile and a shooting." Jeb's grip tightened on the rifle. "That true?" Creed did not look at him. "She is buying time." "Answer me," Jeb said. A soft wind moved across the ridge. Caleb saw the first crack in Creed's control. Eliza held the book closer. "Ask him why he needed the marshal's badge. Ask him why he took Turner's coat. Ask him who he planned to blame when this was done." Jeb turned the rifle slightly, no longer pointed at the wash, not fully pointed at Creed either. Creed moved fast. The cane came up, not as a walking stick but as a weapon. He struck Jeb's wrist. The rifle fired wild into the sky, and the sound shattered the wash. Caleb lunged for the trail. Hank and Eli raised their rifles. Marshal Briggs pulled Turner behind a bank and shouted for everyone to hold. On the ridge, Jeb stumbled back, clutching his arm. Eliza swung the leather book with both hands and struck Creed across the face. It was not graceful. It was not strong enough to stop a large man for long, but it was enough. Creed staggered. Caleb reached the top of the trail just as Creed grabbed Eliza's wrist. Caleb's voice came low and deadly. "Let her go." Creed pressed the silver cane across Eliza's chest, using her as a shield. His perfect hair had fallen over his forehead. A red mark rose on his cheek where the book had struck him. "Another step," Creed said, "and she pays for your courage." Eliza's eyes met Caleb's. She was afraid now. He could see it, but beneath the fear was something else. Her free hand moved slowly toward her ring. Caleb did not understand at first. Then he remembered the silver band had been loose. His mother's ring had a small break beneath the setting, a flaw from years of wear. Eliza twisted it off and let it fall. Not to the ground. Into the open mouth of the oilcloth bundle. Creed glanced down by instinct. Caleb moved. He struck Creed hard enough to break the man's hold and pulled Eliza away. Creed swung the cane, catching Caleb across the shoulder. Pain burst white through him, but he stayed on his feet. Jeb, shaking and wide-eyed, kicked his fallen rifle away from Creed. "Enough," Jeb said, "no more." Marshal Briggs and Hank reached the ridge a moment later. Briggs seized Creed and wrenched his arms behind him. The silver cane dropped into the dust. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eliza bent and picked up the oilcloth bundle. It was open. Pages had spilled across the ground. Caleb knelt beside her, breathing hard. "Are they ruined?" She gathered them with trembling hands. "No, but there's one missing." Creed laughed then, quiet and ugly, even with Briggs holding him. Eliza looked up. Creed's eyes moved toward the wash below. A single page skated along the wind, sliding over dust, past stone, toward the narrow stream that cut through Miller's wash. The page with the names. If you believe truth is worth fighting for, stay with this story, because one sheet of paper now carried the weight of a ranch, a marriage, and a woman's whole life. Caleb ran downhill after it. But from the far end of the wash, A rider appeared and leaned from the saddle. Silas Rusk snatched the page from the wind and smiled. Silas Rusk held the page like it was a winning card. He sat tall on a black horse at the mouth of Miller's Wash, his hat brim low, his pale eyes bright with triumph. Two riders waited behind him, both armed, both watching Caleb with the dull loyalty of paid men. The wind settled, dust drifted down. For one terrible moment, the whole wash seemed to stop breathing. Caleb stood halfway down the slope, chest heaving, pain burning through his shoulder where Creed's cane had struck him. Above him, Marshal Briggs held Amos Creed in iron hands. Hank and Eli had rifles raised, but Rusk's men had the narrow exit covered. Eliza stood on the ridge with loose papers clutched to her heart. Rusk smiled at her. "Well now," he called. "A bride, a book, a marshal, and half the valley chasing paper through the dirt. This is a sad picture, Hart." Caleb took one step down, handed over Silas. Rusk looked at the page. This little thing seems powerful for something so easy to tear. Eliza's face went white. Creed laughed from the ridge. "Tear it, Rusk, tear it and be done." Marshal Briggs tightened his grip until Creed winced. Rusk lifted the page higher. "I could burn it, could drop it in the stream, could chew it up and spit it at your boots." "You could," Eliza called, her voice carrying across the wash. "But then you would lose the only protection you have." Rusk's smile thinned. Caleb turned slightly, not taking his eyes off Rusk. Eliza began descending the trail with careful steps, the remaining papers held tight under one arm. "You think that page protects me?" Rusk asked. "I know it does," she said. "Whitcomb keeps records because he trusts paper more than men. Creed came for the book because it names him. If you destroy the page, Creed becomes the only man who knows how deep your part runs." Rusk glanced toward Creed. Creed's mouth hardened. Eliza reached the wash floor and stood beside Caleb. She was dusty, scratched, and shaking, but her voice stayed clear. "You think Gideon Whitcomb will protect you after this. He will say you acted alone. Creed will say the same if it saves his neck. That page is the last proof that you were not the only guilty man." Rusk's horse shifted under him. For the first time, Caleb saw doubt cross the rancher's face. Rusk was cruel, greedy, and proud, but he was not stupid. He had built his power by knowing which way danger leaned. Now it leaned toward him. Marshal Briggs called from the ridge, "Rusk, hand me that paper and ride in under your own name. Make me drag you, and I promise the whole territory hears about it before sunset." Rusk sneered. Big talk from a marshal who brought a crooked deputy. Turner, still weak and seated against the bank, lifted his bruised face. "I was struck for asking questions. You know it." Jeb Mallory, standing near Hank with one arm held close to his chest, looked down at Rusk. "He ain't lying." Rusk's eyes snapped to Jeb. "You shut your mouth." Jeb swallowed, but he did not look away. "No, I'm done shutting it for men who leave others to hang." The words stirred something in the wash. Even Rusk's own men shifted in their saddles. Caleb looked at them. "You boys want to die guarding a page that will send your boss to prison." No one answered. Eliza stepped forward. Caleb reached to stop her, but she gently moved past his hand. "Mr. Rusk," she said, "you wanted Willow Spur because you thought land was power. You wanted the springs, the cattle road, the freight contracts. But you forgot something every rancher should know." Rusk's eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" "No man owns water forever. He only holds it until the truth finds a lower place to run." For a heartbeat, Rusk looked as if he might laugh. Then a sound came from behind him. Wagon wheels. Down the north road, a buckboard appeared at speed, driven by Mrs. Bell. Beside her sat Ruth Danner from Bitter Creek, holding onto her bonnet with one hand and a shotgun with the other. Behind them rode a cluster of townsfolk, ranchers, and merchants, men and women who had fought the fire, men and women who had heard enough lies for one day. Caleb's heart lifted. Mrs. Bell drew the wagon to a hard stop behind Rusk's riders. "You are blocking the road, Silas," she shouted. Rusk turned in the saddle, fury rising red in his face. "This is not town business." Ruth Danner stood in the wagon. Soot still marked her cheek. "My store burned, that makes it town business." A gray-bearded rancher named Abel Fry rode forward. "My feed orders were delayed twice last winter after I refused your price. That makes it valley business." Another man called, "My fence was cut too." "And mine." "And my well was fouled." The voices grew. Rusk's two riders looked around and saw the valley no longer standing behind them. Fear moved over their faces, then good sense. One lowered his rifle, the other followed. Rusk saw his power slipping, and did what men like him often did when cornered. He reached for his gun. Caleb moved first, but Eliza was closer to the horse. She struck the animal's reins with the leather book. The black horse jerked sideways. Rusk's shot went wild into the claybank. Before he could fire again, Caleb dragged him from the saddle and slammed him into the dust. Hank and Briggs were on him in seconds. The page fluttered free from Rusk's hand. Eliza caught it before it touched the ground. This time, she held it with both hands and did not let the wind have it. By late afternoon, Silas Rusk, Amos Creed, Jeb Mallory, and the shaken Deputy Turner were taken back toward Bitter Creek under guard. Jeb rode with his head low, not bound but watched. He had chosen truth late, and late truth still carried a cost. The town followed in a long, dusty line. Caleb and Eliza rode at the back. For a while neither spoke. The danger had passed for the moment, but not the reckoning. Whitcomb still waited somewhere beyond them, rich enough to reach across states, proud enough to destroy anyone who made him look small. Eliza looked down at the page in her lap. This may not be enough. Caleb glanced at her. It will be enough to start. And if Judge Weatherby cannot stop Whitcomb, then we keep going until someone can. She turned to him, and the setting sun caught the silver ring on her finger. "You hardly know me," she said. Caleb looked ahead at the road, at the smoke fading over Bitter Creek, at the town that had nearly condemned her and then followed her into the wash. "I know what a person does when fear comes. That tells plenty." Before she could answer, a lone rider appeared on the southern ridge. He wore a fine dark suit covered in trail dust. His horse was calm. His posture was straight. His face, even from a distance, carried the cold confidence of a man used to being obeyed. Eliza stopped breathing. Caleb knew before she said the name. Gideon Whitcomb had come to Montana himself. Gideon Whitcomb rode down from the ridge, as if the whole valley had been waiting for his arrival. No haste, no fear, no shame. His black suit was dusty from travel, but he wore it like a judge's robe. His beard was trimmed neat, his gloves clean, and his eyes rested on Eliza with the same cold disappointment she remembered from childhood. Caleb felt her horse shift beside his. "You do not have to speak to him alone," he said. Eliza's hand closed around the leather book. "I know." Whitcomb stopped in the road before the long line of townsfolk. Behind Caleb, Marshal Briggs held Silas Rusk bound in the saddle. Amos Creed sat stiff and silent, his perfect coat torn at the shoulder. Jeb Mallory kept his head down. Whitcomb looked at them all, then gave a small sigh. "What a sad display," he said. "A frightened woman, a rash rancher, and a town mistaking confusion for justice." Eliza's face tightened, but she did not lower her eyes. Marshal Briggs rode forward. "Gideon Whitcomb, you are named in documents tied to arson, land fraud, bribery, and attempted intimidation. You will come with us to Bitter Creek, then Helena." Whitcomb smiled faintly. "Marshal, you are holding stolen papers from my private office, nothing more." "They were stolen because you made the truth impossible to reach any other way," Eliza said. His eyes moved to her. Child, you always did mistake emotion for proof. Caleb started to speak, but Eliza touched his sleeve. Not yet. She rode forward alone, until only a few yards separated her from the man who had raised her without love and used care as a cage. I used to fear that word, she said. Child, you said it whenever I asked questions, whenever I corrected your figures, whenever I asked why my father's accounts did not match yours. Whitcomb's face hardened. Your father was weak with money. No, Eliza said. My father trusted the wrong friend. A murmur moved through the crowd. Whitcomb leaned closer in the saddle. You think these people will save you? Frontier people forget fast when money speaks. From behind him came a voice, old and firm. Not all of us. A buggy rolled into view from the south road. In it sat Judge Amos Weatherby, wrapped in a gray travel coat with 2 court officers riding beside him. Eliza's breath caught. The judge climbed down slowly, leaning on a plain wooden cane. His eyes moved over Eliza's face, then to the book in her hands. Mrs. Hart, he said gently, your letter reached me. So did Mrs. Bell's copy. Whitcomb turned pale for the first time. Mrs. Bell sat straight in her wagon, chin lifted like a queen. Judge Weatherby faced the marshal. I have enough sworn complaints and supporting records to hold these men until formal charges are filed. Mr. Whitcomb's older dealings have been under quiet review for some time. Whitcomb's mouth opened, but no words came. Eliza dismounted and walked to the judge. Her hands trembled as she gave him the leather book and the wind-caught page that had nearly been lost. These are all I could carry. The judge took them with care. Sometimes all a person can carry is enough. Whitcomb looked at Eliza then, not with love, not with regret, but with anger that his smallest piece had moved against him. You would ruin your own family, he asked. Eliza stood in the road, dust on her hem, Caleb's mother's ring shining on her hand. You were never my family. You were only the man who kept my family's name locked in your drawer. Silence followed. Then Judge Weatherby nodded to the officers. Gideon Whitcomb was taken from his horse without drama. No grand fight. No final threat that mattered. Just a rich man's wrists closed in plain iron while the town watched. For Eliza, that was justice enough. Weeks passed before the papers were fully read in Helena. The truth was larger than anyone had guessed. Whitcomb's debts, Rusk's land schemes, Creed's threats, and the false contracts all came into daylight. Rusk lost his claim to the disputed water. Creed went east in chains to answer for older crimes. Whitcomb's fortune cracked under lawsuits from people he had robbed for years. Jeb Mallory served time for his part, but his confession helped spare others. Pete Dawson stayed at Willow Spur only long enough to repay what he could, then left to care for his sister's boys. Caleb let him go without hatred. That surprised Eliza, but Caleb said a man who had been frightened into wrong should still be given one road back if he was willing to walk it. By autumn, Willow Spur changed. Not into the richest ranch overnight. That was not how real things grew, but it became stronger. Eliza moved the account desk near the kitchen window where morning light fell best. She found waste in freight costs, feed storage, grazing patterns, and cattle sales. Caleb listened, not always easily but honestly. Some evenings they argued over figures until the lamp burned low. Some mornings they rode out together before sunrise, saying little while the horses breathed steam into the cold air. Respect came first. Trust came slower. Love arrived quietly, the way rain reaches dry ground after everyone has stopped looking at the sky. One winter night, Caleb found Eliza on the porch holding the black ribbon that had once been nailed to his barn. She had kept it in a drawer, not from fear, but memory. "Why keep that?" he asked. She looked across the moonlit pasture. "To remember what people thought I was when I came here." "And what were you?" She smiled a little, trouble. Caleb laughed softly, the saving kind. Years later, folks in Bitter Creek would speak of that summer as the season the valley learned the difference between power and courage. Willow Spur became known not just for cattle, but for fairness. Ranchers came to Eliza for advice. Caleb never pretended her mind was less than his pride. And when people asked how a cast-off Eastern bride helped save a Montana ranch, Caleb always gave the same answer. "She was never cast off," he said. "She was sent west by men who did not know her worth. Lucky for me, she found it before I did." If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more emotional Wild West tales where truth rides slow, love grows hard-earned, and justice finds its way home. On their 20th anniversary, Caleb and Eliza rode to the North Spring at sunset. The water ran clear through the grass, shining gold under the fading sky. Caleb took her hand, the old silver ring still on her finger, worn smooth by years of work. No black ribbon moved in the wind now. Only prairie grass, soft and endless, bending toward home.